I'm Peter Frumkin, and I want to welcome you to our course on corporate social responsibility. Here at the University of Pennsylvania, I'm a professor in the School of Social Policy and Practice, where I focus on nonprofit management, social entrepreneurship, and corporate social responsibility. I'm going to be working with you over the next several weeks with a team of outstanding faculty who are going to guide you through a course on the state-of-the-art of corporate social responsibility. We've enlisted 3 other faculty to work with you. Famita Handy, also from the University of Pennsylvania, Robert Bird from the University of Connecticut's Business School, and Lanika Rosa from Rotterdam. Together, we're going to put together a great program for you that will take you inside CSR, show you some of the pressing issues that are going on in the field today, and help you understand where this field is going in the years ahead. In this introductory unit, each faculty member will introduce themselves and introduce the topic of corporate social responsibility from his or her unique perspective. What you'll find is that there's substantial difference in how we understand CSR, how we view it, what big issues we think are emerging in the field, and how we understand the very kind of rationale for this entire field. I'd like to encourage you to sample across these different views to understand that this is a contested field where there's not enormous amounts of settled doctrine, and to choose for yourself those elements that you think are most helpful, most useful to you. I think that we can all benefit when we have multiple perspectives on a complex topic. That's why we put together this faculty team that will give you multiple perspectives, multiple dimensions, multiple understandings of this emerging and complex world of corporate social responsibility. So we have a bunch of big questions that we're going to ask, which is, what is CSR? Why do companies do CSR? How can you practice CSR strategically? We're going to try to explore these questions from an insider perspective, meaning we're going to look at them from the perspective of companies that want to do this work, but we're also going to step outside and look at this from the perspective of the community and ask, how do CSR programs shape the community and the world? So both inside and outside perspectives on the big questions in CSR. Now, the interesting thing about corporate social responsibility is that the very term itself is under dispute. For years, people used a lot of different other language to describe this work. So let's look at some of the words that floated around just to get a sense of how contested and how different this very field has been conceptualized over time. Initially, there's a lot of talk about corporate philanthropy, and this focused on the idea that companies could make contributions, make charitable gifts to organizations around them. I think this is a first kind of very limiting idea that CSR is limited just to giving. And so the term corporate philanthropy, I think, ultimately has fallen out of favor over time because it doesn't capture the breadth of activities that can be part of CSR initiatives. Then there was a time when people used the word corporate community affairs to capture a little bit of the idea that companies are engaged with communities, that they have partnerships with NGOs around them, and that they are part of something bigger than just the formal boundaries of the firm. But the concept of corporate community affairs didn't really capture, I think, some of the more strategic and more self-interested elements of corporate social responsibility, and so that term also fell a little bit out of disfavor. Then there was talk, I'd say in the 80s and 90s, of corporate citizenship, and this language designed to capture the idea that companies are part of the civic culture of America, that they have a responsibility to be part of the big problem solving that goes on in the country. And as citizens, corporations have responsibilities. Again, this concept came up, it got used, but then it got kind of pushed aside. I think another term that became very popular was corporate social investing. Corporate social investing captures this idea that this activity is strategic. It's designed to create a return, that it's not just one-way philanthropy, but in fact, investment in the community and in the world that's designed to help the firm. But I think ultimately it sounded a bit too instrumental. So I think corporate social investing fell a little bit out of favor. The term we're going to use is corporate social responsibility, which I think is very broad and encompassing. It covers basically a huge range of activities, and it doesn't have some of the baggage that prior concepts and terms had associated with them. So we're going to use CSR, but we're going to be aware of the fact that people use different language around the world to talk about the same thing. We can't go too far in this class without a definition of corporate social responsibility. So let me try one right at the start. I define CSR as everything a company does to create public value, including giving, employee volunteering, sustainability practices, and ethical behavior in the supply chain and beyond. Let me take that apart just a little bit, that definition, because there's a lot packed into it. By public value, I mean value that accrues to more than one person, more than one group of private individuals. Public value is something that's bigger than simply the interests of a company. It includes the interests of a community and a broader set of stakeholders. And by giving, I mean a huge range of activities, not just direct corporate giving, but matching programs and programs that are designed to help their employees raise money and match those funds. Employee volunteering, another concept that can mean a lot of different things. It can mean everything from giving release time to having structured volunteer days, and I want to include all of those in my definition. And by sustainability practices, again, that ranges from environmental practices designed to reduce waste to practices that are designed to create substantial energy and environmental savings. The final piece of the definition I have is this idea of an ethical supply chain. And that means everything the company does to acquire goods and services, everything down the chain that comes to them, and being careful about where they're procuring the goods and the materials that they use in the production of their products. So the definition we have, I think, is very broad, but that's on purpose. We want to include in this course a huge range of activities, not just a few. So let's look ahead. Over the next 3 weeks, and including this first opening week, we're going to be covering the big questions in corporate social responsibility. We're going to be asking you to do some reading and some assignments along the way to make sure that some of the concepts and ideas we work on get driven deeper into your understanding of this field. We hope that you leave the course at the end with a clear and precise understanding of what's going on in corporate social responsibility today, and that you can participate in the broad discussion and debate about where this field needs to go in the coming years. Let's ask a big question. Why should companies engage in any kind of philanthropy at all? The core function of almost every company is to create value for shareholders. That's what they're designed to do. That's what they're expected to do. They're expected to find ways to increase the value and wealth of the investors that have trusted their funds to the company. So there's a troubling question at some level about why any company would do philanthropy in any form. Why would it do anything that is socially responsible if it detracted from the bottom line? In fact, there's a long history of challenges to the legitimacy of corporate giving, corporate philanthropy, and even social responsibility from shareholders who wonder, what is this costing me? Why is the firm doing it? What will it do to the bottom line? Now, there are, I think, good arguments for CSR that counter some of these concerns about deteriorating shareholder value. And I think the most important one comes down to CSR can actually add to the financial bottom line. It can actually improve the financial performance of a firm. In some ways, that is the most important counter to the challenge to the legitimacy of this field. And we need to understand that many people don't necessarily buy this idea that CSR actually contributes to the core function of the firm and that it actually enhances the performance of a company. So we're going to look at that a bit more together and how this might happen, how value might be created for both the community and the company. And I think if we can get a clear sense that CSR adds value to all parties, that will take us over and past the objections and concerns that some people have expressed about this very field. The core to overcoming these concerns, I think, is visualizing a Venn diagram that has 3 parts. On one side, corporate benefits, meaning what does the activity do for the company. On the other side, community benefits, meaning what happens and what benefits are created for those stakeholders around a company. And then in the middle, the point of overlap, the sweet spot, is the CSR activity. This diagram, this Venn diagram, showing CSR as representing the overlapping moment when community benefits and company benefits interact and overlap, I think is the core response to the challenge about why should companies do CSR. You have to believe that there is, in fact, a sweet spot, a point of overlap between company and community benefits. And I think a huge challenge in the field has been to make the case that this overlap actually exists. And we're going to try to explore, in many ways, how good that argument has been. Now, part of the challenge of constructing an argument that CSR actually is the sweet spot between company benefits and community benefits has been articulated, I think, over time in a number of different ways. One of the most important earliest formulations of this question of how is it that companies could actually benefit from CSR activities came through a series of very important articles by Jed Emerson, who defined this concept of what he called blended value. And so we need to look at that. And then more recently, there's been arguments about shared value, another way of formulating this point of overlap between company and community. So let's look now at the first of these two ideas, this blended value idea. Blended value is a concept that emerged that said that the value that a company creates cannot be broken apart into different elements, be it financial, social, or environmental. But value is by its nature unified, connected. That whenever a company or any organization tries to create value, it is automatically operating across three different zones: financial, social, and environmental. And what Jed Emerson argued in his early formulation of blended value is that we need to change radically how we think about what companies and, in fact, all organizations do when they do their work. Because his argument is that, in fact, all activity cuts across these three dimensions, and that we cannot have simple definitions of value that are monolithic, that focus just on finance, just on social impact, or just on environmental issues. So I think this early statement by Jed Emerson in his papers on blended value give us a starting point for understanding that, in fact, value is unified, that it does cut across these different dimensions. Now, years later, Michael Porter and Mark Kramer published an important article on shared value. There they extended, I think, and revisited some of the big ideas Jed Emerson had formulated years earlier. And there they made the claim that there was a new Venn diagram, one in which corporate strategy and corporate philanthropy overlapped, and that in that sweet spot was something big and new called shared value and CSR. That corporate strategy had to be overlapping with corporate giving and corporate social responsibility work, and that shared value emerges when philanthropy and strategy are together. Now, their big claim was that we needed to move from a kind of a simplified vision of corporate social responsibility to a more complex, deeper idea of shared value. And there they wanted to move from the value of doing good to the value of economic and social benefits that are understood from the get-go relative to their actual cost, that you need a tougher kind of scrutiny of this idea of doing good and measuring the trade-offs. They wanted to move from citizenship, philanthropy, and sustainability to this idea of joint company and community value creation. That was a big shift they were going after. They wanted to move from the idea that CSR was something that was discretionary or that might come up in response to external pressure to something that is actually an integral part of the competitive strategy and orientation of a firm. These are transitions they were making an argument for that we couldn't continue on with CSR without a deeper understanding of this shift towards shared value that would inform the field. They also wanted to make the claim that separating profit maximization from CSR was no longer sustainable, that we needed to integrate this idea of profit maximization right into the concept of shared value, and that CSR's earlier agenda of focusing on the kind of limited focus on corporate footprint and CSR budget and viewing it as a discrete area, that had to be set aside for a bigger new idea that says that the whole company's budget and strategy needs to be realigned around this concept of shared value. So along a bunch of different dimensions, they made the claim that a big transition was needed from traditional notions of corporate philanthropy or corporate social responsibility to their concept of shared value. What I think has happened is that many companies were ahead of the curve. They had already made many of the transitions that Porter and Kramer were arguing for. But still, the article presents an important kind of framework for us to think about what it would take to move CSR into a new and more strategic domain. So there are lots of ideas out there about what corporate philanthropy, corporate social responsibility might look like. I think they come from ideas about the triple bottom line, about shared value, but ultimately we need to come back to our understanding that what we're going to talk about is CSR as the activity any company engages in to create public value that includes giving, volunteering, sustainability, and ethical supply chains. That's going to be our touchstone, but we have to understand there's a lot of literature around this that has tried to make this claim that we have to understand CSR as part of a bigger shift towards new conceptions of value, both blended value and shared value.